Happy Halloween. Tonight's the night, October 31st, 2024, where the veil is thin and nightmares come to life. And you know what's even scarier than ghosts and goblins? The fact that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought, isn't it? And speaking of chilling, we're about to take a deep dive into the creation of one of horror's most iconic figures, Freddy Krueger.
Oh, Freddy, the man of our nightmares. What's so fascinating about Freddy is that he's not some ancient evil or supernatural force. He was dreamed up by a guy named Wes Craven, a filmmaker who seemed to have a direct line to our deepest fears.
Craven had this uncanny ability to tap into the anxieties of his time and twist them into something truly terrifying. He was inspired by a lot of things, some personal, some pulled from the headlines.
Right, like those unsettling stories about the sudden sleep deaths of Southeast Asian refugees in the 1970s.
Exactly. These men, many of whom had fled war-torn countries, were having vivid, terrifying nightmares. Some even died in their sleep, leading to the term Asian death syndrome. Craven was reading about these cases, and it got under his skin, this idea that your dreams could literally kill you.
It's like something out of a horror movie, but it was actually happening.
Yeah.
Did the song Dreamweaver play into it as well?
It did. Craven has said that the Gary Wright song, with its lyrics about a midnight dreamer, was swirling around in his head as he was developing the concept for Freddy. The song, the news stories, it all started to blend together.
It's eerie how those pieces came together to create something so iconic and scary.
It really is. And then there was Craven's own personal experience as a kid. He once saw this menacing figure standing outside his bedroom window late at night. The guy just stared at him for what felt like forever before disappearing into the darkness.
Okay, now that's just creepy.
It definitely stuck with Craven, that feeling of being watched, of being vulnerable in your own home, even in your own bed. It became a core element of Freddy's character.
So Freddy wasn't just a monster in your dreams. He was a monster that invaded the one place you should feel safe, your home.
Exactly. And that's what really set Freddy Krueger apart from other horror villains. Craven didn't want a silent masked killer. He wanted a monster who could taunt and threaten his victims, get inside their heads even before he attacked. He wanted Freddy to personify that fear of the unknown, of the things that go bump in the night.
He's like the boogeyman. But instead of hiding under the bed, he's hiding in your dreams. A place where you can't escape.
Exactly. And Freddy's look was just as important as his personality. Craven wanted a villain who was visually striking, someone who would stay with you long after the credits rolled.
And he nailed it. The hat, the burned face, that glove.
Oh, the glove. It's the stuff of nightmares. And it actually went through a few iterations before Craven landed on the final design. Initially, he just pictured Freddy with a long, sharp knife, but it didn't feel menacing enough.
I mean, a knife is scary, but it's not exactly unique to Freddy.
Right, he needed something more. And then it hit him. He would fuse the primal fear of knives with something even more terrifying. The feeling of being trapped and helpless.
So he attached the knives to a glove.
Precisely. It was a stroke of genius. Suddenly, the weapon wasn't just a threat. It was an extension of Freddy himself reaching out to grab you, to pull you into his world.
And the colors of Freddy's sweater, that red and green combo, it's so unsettling.
It's not a coincidence. Craven deliberately chose those colors because of the way they clash on the human retina. He knew those colors would subconsciously create a sense of unease and visual discord.
So Freddy was designed from the ground up to be a nightmare. But getting that nightmare onto the big screen, that was another challenge entirely.
It absolutely was. In fact, Craven almost didn't get to make A Nightmare on Elm Street at all. He faced a lot of pushback from studios who thought the concept was too dark, too disturbing.
Can you imagine pitching Freddy Krueger to Disney?
Believe it or not, they were one of the studios that passed on the project. They wanted to make it more family-friendly.
Family-friendly Freddy. That's just wrong on so many levels. Thankfully, Craven didn't compromise his vision.
He held firm, and eventually a small independent company called New Line Cinema took a chance on him. They were willing to embrace the darkness, the edginess that other studios shied away from.
And that gamble paid off big time. A Nightmare on Elm Street became a huge hit and launched New Line into the big leagues.
They even became known as the house that Freddy built, but it was a close call. There were moments during production when it seemed like the whole thing might fall apart due to financial struggles.
I read that they were scrambling for funding at the last minute, and it was actually an investor's girlfriend who stepped in and saved the day.
It's true. They were days away from shutting down production when this woman, completely unrelated to the film industry, saw the potential in Craven's vision and decided to invest. Talk about a guardian angel.
Without her, Freddy might have remained just a nightmare in Wes Craven's head.
And now he's a cultural icon, a symbol of our deepest fears and anxieties.
So the film was finally a go. But finding the right actor to play Freddy Krueger? That had to be another hurdle. I mean, how do you cast someone who could embody pure nightmare fuel?
Casting Freddy was crucial. They needed someone who could be both menacing and charismatic, someone who could make you fear him, but also in a strange way kind of like him.
Well, Robert Englund is Freddy. It's hard to imagine anyone else in that role.
He's absolutely iconic, but he wasn't the first choice. Initially, the role was offered to David Warner.
David Warner. Wow, that would have been a completely different Freddy.
It would have. But scheduling conflicts prevented Warner from taking the role, which sent Craven on a frantic search for a new Freddy. He needed someone who could truly capture the character's sinister charm and willingness to delve into dark places.
And then Robert Englund walks in, a character actor known for playing mostly nice guys up to that point.
Right. And Englund knew he had to do something different to stand out. He went to the audition with a look he described as rat-like and weasel-like. He wanted to subvert the expectation of a hulking, physically imposing villain.
And it worked. Craven saw something in Englund's intensity, his ability to convey menace with just a look.
As soon as Englund walked in the room, Craven knew he'd found his Freddy. He might not have been the biggest guy, but he had this unnerving presence, this way of looking at you that just sent chills down your spine.
And the rest, as they say, is horror history.
It truly is. It's hard to imagine A Nightmare on Elm Street without Robert Englund's chilling performance as Freddy Krueger. He brought a depth and complexity to the character that no one else could have.
So we have Wes Craven's twisted genius, a shoestring budget, a last-minute financial miracle, and a brilliant casting choice. That's quite the recipe for a horror classic.
And we haven't even gotten to the actual filming process yet, the things they did to bring this nightmare to life. But let's just say they were pretty ingenious and maybe even a little bit crazy.
Okay, you've definitely piqued my curiosity.
Okay.
I'm ready to hear about the blood, sweat, and pancake batter that went into making A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, there was plenty of all three. But before we get into that, we need to talk about the locations that brought this nightmare to life. And believe it or not, one of them is a place you can actually visit today.
Wait, you're telling me I can go to Freddy Krueger's house?
Well, not exactly Freddy's, but Nancy's house from the movie, the one with the infamous address, 1428 Elm Street. It's a real house in Los Angeles, and it's become a bit of a pilgrimage site for horror fans.
Now that's a Halloween road trip I can get behind. But let's get back to the nitty-gritty of filming. I mean, A Nightmare on Elm Street is full of these amazing special effects, and I'm guessing they didn't have CGI back then.
They did not. They had to rely on good old-fashioned ingenuity and a whole lot of fake blood.
How much fake blood are we talking about here?
Over 500 gallons.
500 gallons, that's enough to fill a swimming pool.
It's a lot of blood.
Mm.
And they used every drop of it to create some of the most gruesome and memorable death scenes in horror movie history.
Mm.
There's that iconic scene where one of the characters is turned into a literal fountain of blood.
Oh yeah, the blood geyser. I've heard stories about that scene.
Hmm.
Wasn't there a mishap with the special effects?
There was. It turns out that they almost drenched the director Wes Craven and the actress Heather Langenkamp, who played Nancy in a tidal wave of fake blood.
Talk about method directing.
Right. And then there's that other iconic scene, the one with the melting staircase.
Oh, the melting staircase. That's one of the most visually disturbing scenes in the whole movie. It just oozes with this sense of unreality and dread.
You know, that wasn't originally in the script. It was actually Robert Shea, one of the producers, who had the idea. He used to have nightmares about melting staircases, so he suggested they incorporate it into the film.
Yeah, thank goodness they did. It's such a powerful image. How do they even pull that off without CGI?
You're not going to believe this. They used pancake batter.
Pancake batter.
Seriously.
Yep. They poured gallons of pancake batter down a specially constructed set, and the effect was incredibly realistic and totally creepy. It just goes to show you that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective. And sometimes the most terrifying things are hiding in plain sight, just like Freddy Krueger himself.
Speaking of Freddy, we haven't even scratched the surface of his impact on pop culture.
From catchphrases to costumes, Freddy Krueger has become a Halloween staple. But beyond the merchandise and the sequels, there's something deeper, something truly unsettling about this character that has captivated audiences for decades.
There is. He's become a reflection of our own anxieties, our fears of the dark, of the unknown. And maybe, just maybe, he reminds us that the monsters we fear the most are often the ones we create ourselves. You know, one of the things that makes A Nightmare on Elm Street so effective is how it blurs the lines between dreams and reality.
Totally. It's like you're constantly questioning what's real and what's a nightmare, and that feeling of uncertainty just amps up the fear.
Exactly. Craven was a master at using visual and auditory cues to create this disorienting, dreamlike atmosphere. He'd play with lighting, sound camera angles, even the editing to keep the audience off balance. You're never quite sure what's going to happen next, or if you can even trust your own eyes.
Like that scene where Nancy falls asleep in the bathtub, and suddenly Freddy's glove comes up between her legs, the way the water ripples and distorts the image. It's both surreal and terrifying.
That scene is a perfect example of how Craven used practical effects and clever camera work to create a truly unsettling experience. And the sound design in that scene is incredible, too. That gurgling, suffocating sound, it's like you can feel the water closing in on you, pulling you under.
It's brilliant filmmaking.
Yeah.
And speaking of brilliant, we have to talk about the music. That haunting theme song, the one the little girls sing while jumping rope. It's so simple, yet so effective, it gets stuck in your head. And it just adds to the creepiness of the whole film.
It's one of the most iconic pieces of horror movie music ever written. And you know it's even more fascinating? It wasn't even composed by Charles Bernstein, who did the film's score.
Wait, really? If he didn't write it, then who did?
It was actually written by Heather Langenkamp's boyfriend at the time, a musician named Alan Pasqua. He came up with the melody, and then Bernstein incorporated it into the soundtrack.
Wow, that's amazing. A little love story behind one of horror's most chilling tunes.
But let's move beyond the surface and talk about the deeper themes at play in A Nightmare on Elm Street. One of the most prominent is this idea of the sins of the parents being visited upon the children.
That's a classic horror trope, and Craven really leans into it. From the very beginning, it's clear that the parents in this film are harboring a dark secret. A secret that comes back to haunt their children in the form of Freddy Krueger.
It's not just about literal sins, though. It's also about the ways in which parents can damage their children emotionally and psychologically through neglect, abuse, or even just their own unresolved traumas.
The parents in A Nightmare on Elm Street are all flawed in some way. They're alcoholics. They're distant. They're in denial about the past. And their children are left to deal with the consequences.
Right. Freddy Krueger, in a way, represents the dark side of parenthood. The monster that lurks beneath the surface of seemingly normal families. He's the embodiment of everything the parents try to repress, the darkness they try to hide.
That's a pretty profound reading of a slasher film.
But that's what makes A Nightmare on Elm Street so enduring. It's not just about cheap scares and gore. It's about something deeper, something that speaks to our anxieties about family childhood and the monsters that hide in the shadows of our minds.
And it's not just the parents who are flawed. Craven also doesn't shy away from the dark realities of adolescence. He shows us the awkwardness, the vulnerability, the raging hormones, and the very real dangers that teenagers face.
Exactly. Freddy Krueger preys on teenagers for a reason. They're at a point in their lives where they're transitioning from childhood to adulthood. They're questioning authority, exploring their sexuality, trying to figure out who they are. And Freddy exploits that uncertainty, that vulnerability.
He's like the ultimate embodiment of teenage angst and insecurity. He's the monster in the closet, the boogeyman under the bed, but amplified to a terrifying degree.
He's a reflection of the fears and anxieties that we all carry within us, especially during those turbulent adolescent years. And A Nightmare on Elm Street reminds us that those fears can be very real, that they can haunt us even in our dreams.
Especially in our dreams. Because dreams are where we're most vulnerable, where our defenses are down and our deepest fears can surface.
And that's what makes Freddy so terrifying. He can get to you anywhere, anytime. He's not bound by the rules of the waking world.
So what can we learn from A Nightmare on Elm Street? Is there a message, a takeaway beyond the scares?
I think one of the key takeaways is the importance of confronting our fears, of not letting them control us. Nancy ultimately defeats Freddy by turning her back on him, by refusing to be afraid of him.
She realizes that fear is what gives Freddy power. And by taking away that power, she's able to defeat him.
Exactly. It's a powerful message and one that's especially relevant today. In a world that's increasingly filled with anxiety and uncertainty, it's more important than ever to remember that we have the power to overcome our fears.
We just had to be brave enough to face them.
And to believe in ourselves, just like Nancy did. But you know, beyond all the psychological depth and thematic richness, A Nightmare on Elm Street is also just a damn good horror movie.
Oh, absolutely. It's got everything you could want in a horror flick: suspense, gore, jump scares, and a villain who's both terrifying and strangely charismatic.
Freddy Krueger is such a unique creation. He's a monster, yes, but he's also got this dark sense of humor. He's always cracking jokes, even as he's slashing his victims to ribbons.
He's like the evil class clown of the horror world.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes him so appealing. He's scary, but he's also entertaining. You can't help but be drawn to him, even as you're repulsed by his actions.
And his one-liners. Legendary. Welcome to primetime, bitch. You're all my children now. They're almost as iconic as he is.
Right, Freddy's dark humor, his quips. They're as much a part of his legacy as the burned face and the glove. They've wormed their way into pop culture, haven't they?
They really have. And you know what?
Yeah.
It adds this whole other dimension to the movie. You're terrified, obviously, but you're also kind of laughing along with them. It's such a weird mix of emotions, but that's part of what makes A Nightmare on Elm Street so effective.
It is a delicate balance to strike that mix of horror and humor. But Craven understood that a little bit of levity, a moment of dark comedy, can actually make the scares even more potent.
It's like he lets you catch your breath for a second, you think you're safe, and then bam! He hits you with another terrifying image or jump scare.
Keeps you on edge. A Nightmare on Elm Street is a masterclass in suspense and pacing. It's a roller coaster ride of terror and dark comedy, and it's a ride you just can't get off.
And even when it's over, it stays with you. It's like Freddy Krueger burrows into your subconscious. He becomes a part of your own personal nightmare landscape.
I think that's why A Nightmare on Elm Street has resonated with audiences for so long. It taps into our primal fears, the things that keep us up at night, the fear of the dark, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of the unknown. And those fears, well, they never really go away, do they?
They don't. And Craven knew that. He knew how to exploit those fears, how to twist them into something truly terrifying.
He gave us a villain who is a reflection of ourselves, a monster that lives in the shadows of our minds. And he reminded us that sometimes the most frightening things are the ones we create ourselves.
So as we celebrate Halloween tonight, let's remember the legacy of Freddy Krueger, the man of our nightmares, and the film that launched 1,000 screams. And maybe, just maybe, before you drift off to sleep, leave the lights on just in case. Happy Halloween.